Good afternoon. Thank you for attending the Scale Appropriate Technology for Specialty Crop Production webinar presented by Jean-Paul Cortens of Roxbury Farm. My name is Eric Pulaski. I am the Sustainable Agriculture Educator with the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association. I will moderate this afternoon's presentation. This event is part of an educational series offered by OEFFA and the Cuyahoga Valley Countryside Conservancy. OEFFA was founded in 1979 and is a grassroots coalition of farmers, backyard gardeners, consumers, retailers, educators, researchers, and others. For more than 35 years, OEFFA has used education, advocacy, and grassroots organizing to promote local and organic food systems. We are also one of the country's largest and oldest accredited organic certification agencies, certifying a diversity of operations throughout the Midwest. For more information, you can find it on the web at www.oeffa.org. Partial funding for this webinar was provided through the Ohio Department of Agriculture and the United States Department of Agriculture Specialty Crop Block Grant Program. The questions this afternoon will be moderated. If you have a question, please type it into the question box on your screen. We will have time for questions at the end of the presentation. Please feel free to submit questions or points of clarification as they come to mind. Mr. Cortens will monitor the questions and may address them during the presentation, but otherwise I will hold the questions until the designated question period at the end. We are pleased and fortunate to introduce Jean-Paul Cortens of Roxbury Farm as our presenter. We hope that this presentation can enhance the triple bottom line of your sustainable specialty crop operation. Without further ado, Jean-Paul Cortens.
Hi, thanks, Eric. It's always a little interesting to be talking to my own screen here, and I hope that I'll be able to keep you guys captivated for the next hour or so. And this presentation is specifically designed for people who are interested in machinery technology that allows vegetable growers to become more efficient in running their operation. So what I will do is I will briefly discuss the layout of the Roxbury Farm operation, how we make decisions when we buy equipment, and then I will close with some specific equipment that we use at Roxbury Farm that I thought might be of interest to you. So first, the farm overview and the layout. First, a little bit about us. As Eric already mentioned, we believe in a triple bottom line, and that means that for us, that if we want healthy soils, we want healthy plants and animals, we look at our farm as a whole system. And when you talk about whole, then we mean that the farm is whole when the crew, for example, needs to feel that their work has meaning. The work has to be meaningful, which means that we value them not just as a worker but as a human being. The farm is whole when the customers, they feel nourished by the produce that we provide them with. And our farm is whole when the animals are allowed to be the creatures they were destined to be, to live the life they were designed for. And we consider our farm to be whole when the land is cared for, whereby the natural diversity is honored with places for more than just cultivated plants and animals, but also for its wild counterparts. And last but not least, our farm is whole when we are financially viable, and that's really a big part where the equipment comes in. Now, a little bit more about our farm. We are about 390 acres. We're in the Hudson Valley of New York, which is beautiful. It's nestled in between the Catskill Mountains on one side and then the Berkshire Mountains on the other side, and the Hudson River flowing in between. We have beautiful bottom land. About 100 acres is stone-free silt loam, and 45 acres of that are at any given time in produce, and we have 45 acres in green manure crops, 210 acres in hay and pasture for the animals, and then the remainder of the land is really set aside for biodiversity. Now, to support this 390-acre farm, 80% of our revenue actually comes from the 45 acres, which is interesting how that works. And only 10% of our revenue comes from the 210 acres that are hay and pasture. So you can see there's a tremendous need for the vegetables on the farm to keep our farm financially viable. So at Roxbury Farm, our goal is to raise vegetables with the lowest possible financial and other input without compromising soil health or the worker standard of living and the quality of the produce, and that's a real challenge. So this is part of the 125-acre South Farm where most of the vegetables are grown, and each field has a name, and that's right now, if you look at this picture, it's a pretty sharp contrast from how we found it. It was a potato farm, and so all that ground was open when we. Now, if you look at this picture, you see all these strips there. Those are actually 50-foot wide strips. So all the fields are divided. There's a system there whereby you divide all the fields in 50-foot strips. Now, we do that, and I just wanted to, introduce, talking about machinery, because it facilitates, the mechanization of our farm. It gives us a way, roadways in which we can access the produce. And I'm going to not go to the way that this is written down here, but the most important part of this is that we don't want anybody to walk with a crate of produce more than 25 feet. So they take it out of the field and they, put it into the harvest lane, and then a truck will pick it up and pick it up. And we have access in all weather conditions. A truck can always get on there and never get stuck in mud. But the size of those sections are based really on the irrigation traveler, because if we run the traveler in one of these harvest lanes, it will cover 2 sections on the left and 2 sections on the right. And then when we run our sprayer, which we also, we drive with a tractor with a sprayer in the back, it's a one-sided boom sprayer. We cover half the section at any given time. So, and of course, it is much easier record keeping if you have these sections always laid out like that. Now, within these sections, we have 8 beds. And those 8 beds, they give us a kind of a system of a controlled field traffic. It means that the wheel tracks are always in the same place. We chose for raised beds partly because it gives a rail whereby anybody can drive a tractor into that rail, because it's a furrow. When I lay out 8 beds in that section, I know when they start transplanting, they put their tractor tires right in those furrows. And so there is no guesswork in that sense as what the distance is going to be. It makes that we can have, an inexperienced tractor operator sit on the transplanter and basically make sure that everything is spaced evenly. But these furrows do provide some drainage during downpours, and of course there's tremendous good structure in the top of the rate bed. We never drive when we are doing tillage on the area where we actually grow plants. So the whole thing is that we the wheels of all tractors, they're set at 72 inches apart, and then we grow a variety of crops in between. So here's an example of that. So you can see here where is the wheel tracks. They're set at 6 feet, and then the bed former will leave a flat top at about 56 inches wide. Now, we came up with this because we can comfortably raise 2 crops there at 36 inches apart. Now, why 36 inches? We wanted a lot of space in between our crop to get good air drainage. 30 inches is more than sufficient for most crops, including potatoes, but we just gave it the extra 6 inches because we felt that it really provided better health for our crops, and plus we can grow more rows in between our tractor tires. So then the question came up, what can we fit between two 36-inch rows? Because you want to have the same cultivation equipment for all the different row spacing. So we put one row in between 36. You have 3 rows for 18 inches. Then we put another row in between those 3 rows of 18 inches. You come up with 5 rows that are 9 inches apart. And at one point, when we had a salad harvester, we even planted 9 rows 4.5 inches apart. The one that is somewhat exempt from that and that doesn't apply to any of these row spacing is our plasticulture. There can be 1 row or 2 row. It doesn't really matter. It's a whole different system altogether. So I want to next go into our decision-making process. So then you ask yourself a couple of questions, and there are different ways and different considerations. And a big one is financial. It's a reality. And so when you make a decision to do something, you need to ask yourself the question is that I can buy all that equipment, but you know, nature actually often can do a better job than a piece of equipment, or they can work in conjunction. And a good example of that is your subsoiler here. When we found the potato farm, it had a plow pan 9 inches deep. We take this yeoman plow, we went about 1 or 2 inches below the plow pan. But then actually the remainder of the fracturing of the hard soil deeper down from tractor trailers going on there and taking the potatoes away was done with sweet clover and other deep rooting crops. So it's just a way in which there are crops that can take over certain tools. Another example of that is our rotation. We believe in low input especially of labor. And we have the land resources, and we use the land resource as a way to minimize the input of labor and the input of fertility brought in from the outside by growing green manure crops. Green manure crops allows us to have a bare fallow in a period where normally you only plant vegetables. And that is really important because you can buy all the weed control tools in the world. But at a certain point, if your rotation is vegetables after vegetables, you will see certain weeds coming in like galansoga and chickweed, and the ones that are able to set seed to seed in a very short period of time. The one thing about agriculture is that ultimately we are trying to fight gravity. And I learned from an old-time farmer early on that the thing is that you always want to move things down. You never lift them up. And don't find gravity, he said. He saw us lifting all these boxes, onto a truck. And the photo below is actually from a 3,000-acre sweet potato farm. And they're all picked by hand and then put into these 60-pound buckets and then lifted over their head onto the tractor trailer into a bulk bin. It seems like a lot of work. So think about ways to make your work less hard. Think about loading docks. Think about a lift gate on your truck. Think about hand carts, pallet jacks. The whole concrete is such a wonderful invention because you can roll things on it. So we found a barn in our neighborhood to rent instead of having to build a washing and packing barn. And we had to do some improvements like bringing in power, lights, and water lines. But it cost much less than building a new structure. Now, we don't have enough room in the barn to build the cooler space, so we rent cooler space from a local orchard. And we'll talk about that later. Local resources, talk about that. You have to, for example, here we grow sorghum Sudan, that is grows 9 feet tall. And we had a hard time incorporating that with the equipment we had available to us at that point. And my neighboring dairy farmer, he could mow it and he could chop it for me. Now, of course, I broke his heart by, chopping such a wonderful, a feed for the animals and blow it right back on the land. But this is what we did. We were feeding the land instead of the cows. Now, with some equipment, you need to consider the cost of an untimely breakdown. Do you really want to have $4,000 worth of hay in the field depending on a $4,000 baler? And a lot of criticism we get is that we are overcapitalized, maybe with our baler, but for example also with some of the tillage equipment we have. But for example with the baler, we invested a lot of money in the baler because we want high quality feed. I mean, why do we have cows to begin with? We want to have a good quality beef product. So, and that begins with good balers over the winter months. And the other thing where it applies to is getting a 120 horsepower tractor with tillage equipment, allowing us, if there's only one day a week when you have the opportunity to get into the ground and do your deep tillage, you can do it all in one day. So I once heard John Peterson of Angelic Organics say that he figures out what the size of his equipment is and then multiplies it by 2. That's a crude way of coming to an assessment what the right size of your equipment is, but it tells you a little bit about what it is that we are when we're working with small windows of opportunities. And if we lose them, we can lose a lot more money than the money we invest in our equipment. So the other local resources is that here's, for example, in the barn where I talked about earlier, is that we can put our, we don't have winter storage for the winter share of our members, and so we rent cooler space close by, way cheaper than building your own cooler space. It works out really good because these coolers are too small for these apple farmers, but they use them over the summer for their peaches. And when the peach season is over, we fill them up with our winter storage vegetables, so it works good for both of us. The other local resources we have is in growing garlic. We told our members that if they really want garlic, then they're going to have to grow it themselves because it's at a time of the year that we have to harvest it. We don't have the labor available to do it. So the members for the last 20 years, they've come every year in the middle of July. They come and harvest it. They come and help us put it away for curing, and then in the fall they come back again and they plant it. So the other thing is sometimes you buy a piece of equipment and you say like, well, does it really result in greater or lesser production? I mean, the ones in the bottom are pretty obvious. Buying irrigation is really almost a must in vegetable crop production. You've got to find a way to be able to put water on, and these are investments that very quickly earn themselves back. The spray is the same thing. Do you really want to buy an old sprayer? The crop inputs that you're using, the materials are so expensive, you might as well have some control of accuracy in how you apply these chemicals. Actually, we don't use chemicals, but these unrealistic materials that you use. The one thing whereby you can actually wonder about the investment here is the green beans. And for example, green beans, you will actually lose some production because it's a one-time over harvesting. And there's a lot where that is a question about a lot of mechanical harvesting is whereby often we find ourselves at a scale where we're just not quite big enough to justify mechanical harvesting. And hand picking of beans, you will increase the yield dramatically compared to machine picking. And of course, it is really about investing in equipment that will reduce the hand labor at the peak of the season. For us, it is really trying to, when we buy a piece of equipment, we're looking at like, when is this going to be used? And the most obvious place where we need to invest in equipment is in July, August, and September, because that is really when we need to reduce our labor input. The other consideration we have is the payback period. Here's an example of a vacuum seeder in a greenhouse. Well, those things earn themselves back in less than a month compared to, say, hand seeding. Things that are have a really good payback period is taking a welding course, because you can build your own equipment. Here's an example where we priced out a wheat bedder in Holland. we said like, oh my God, if that's simple, we can build it ourselves. So you buy some steel at your local steel supplier, you order the parts that you can build yourself, and then you build yourself a machine. And our crew was quite happy there, not having to crawl on their hands and knees to weed these sweet potatoes here on the right bottom. Sometimes you have to ask yourself the question, does the equipment really save money and time? We once had the opportunity to rent a salad harvester for a few seasons, and we really were convinced it was going to streamline our harvest process. We found that the crop and harvest conditions had to be just perfect, though, or the harvester did not work very well. And for our operation, the salad harvester simply wasn't worth the cost if we would have to purchase it. Now, here is why the machine wasn't worth its purchase price. A crew of 3 people can harvest salad mix for about 30 cents a pound by hand, and a machine would cost about 33 cents a pound. Now, we have employees who want to work in the early part of the day, so the harvester wasn't helping us to address the labor shortage. But the biggest problem for us was that the crop wasn't perfect, like having yellow leaves or maybe some weeds in there. A hand harvesting crew would sort it while they cut. And the harvester would cut everything requiring a sorting line in the barn, or we just wouldn't harvest the crop at all with the machine. And at the dollar value that we charge for salad mix in the CSA share, it just didn't work for us. Now, the other part of it is, of course, too, that if we would have a higher production of salad mix, and if we would cut it a little bit younger, those numbers would come out dramatically different. So it's very much dependent on your market again, so where these numbers pan out for you. But for our particular situation, being a CSA farm where you can harvest your salad mix just a little bit bigger, it just didn't pan out. So how do you scale equipment? While your farm grows, your equipment needs to grow with it. In the beginning, we couldn't afford much but a small moldboard plow, and later on a little chisel plow. And as we grew in scale, we were able to purchase a spading plow, which improved our soil health in ways that a moldboard plow can do. Now, the spader was so slow, it took about 2 hours to plow up 1 acre. It does give a tremendous result, don't get me wrong. But when we reached about 20 acres of vegetables, we simply couldn't spend that much time, on primary tillage. So then we moved up to a larger tractor and a Coulter chisel plow. And this particular machine does primary and secondary tillage in about 15 minutes to an acre. So we were able to sell the plow and the spader in order to actually buy the Coulter chisel plow for almost the same amount of money. Another example of scaling equipment, how it affects your crew. Spending all day bending over on a water wheel is going to be very hard on your crew. On a scale of 10 acres, or I found that once you go over 10 acres, you're better off starting to invest in a planter that is more ergonomically designed. And a carousel planter plants about 5 times faster than a water wheel planter. I've seen a lot of people use a water wheel planter in bare ground. Aside from the aggravation of having to take the mud off the wheels, which is one thing, it's the carousel planter is just so incredibly efficient. It's really something that is going to make your crew very happy. You can see how they sit upright compared to on the left side where they're bending over, and they really feel their back after one day. Now, the cost of equipment can also be spread out if you have more than one enterprise on your farm. This is a shredder. We use that in between plastic to lay straw mulch. But then we also use it as bedding. And so in the summer we use it, you can use it for shredding strawberries. You can use it for shredding straw on your garlic. But in the winter months, the animal operation, that's where it lives, because we need to use bedding in a freestyle operation for the animals. Sometimes, certain innovations, they're so obvious that you don't even see them. This is one example of that. And we inherited this greenhouse when we bought the farm. And we were very pleasantly surprised it had a concrete floor. Having a concrete floor turned this greenhouse into a building. So we only made movable benches. And then once we're done with growing vegetable transplant, it turns into a curing house for the garlic. When the garlic is cured, it cures the onions. After the onions, we take all the benches out and we put our bulk bins in there with winter squash, and it gets cured there. And then later on, we even cure the sweet potatoes. When they are all out of there again, we use it for winter storage for our equipment. So suddenly, this building, because it has a concrete floor, is now turned into a multi-purpose building. That's the whole thing, is that, this is a harvester we bought for potatoes, but then we realized that it could also be used for sweet potatoes, and that spread the cost out over that one piece of equipment. They actually advertise as an onion potato harvester, but we have not been able to successfully harvest onions with it. Other considerations are that when you purchase equipment, it really has to fit in with your overall farm goals, your rate of growth, and with your systems. And also taking out a loan can add a burden to your operation, and it can add way too much stress. Generally, we don't like to take out loans. We think that investing in equipment should come from your net profit. But there are exceptions, and lately there have been a lot of 0% interest loans out there, which brings the payments down to some very reasonable amount. And then we are willing to finance. The next category really is quality of life questions. It's a very important issue for us because ultimately all this equipment can reduce tremendous amount of drudgery. Farming can be drudgery, and it's nothing worse than drudgery. We really want to enjoy our work. So, for example, on the left there, we use plastic bins for our vegetable deliveries, and it's not just about the food safety laws. They are looming, but we just want to have a sort of responsibility that when these bins leave the farm, they have to be clean before we fill them with fresh produce. They come back from the city and we smell them. And so in the past what we did is we had a couple of crew members washing these bins out with power washers. And they really dreaded that tremendously. So we actually have a meeting once a year with our crew where we say, like, what job do you hate the most? And they tell us that they give us feedback. And so one year it was like power washing bins. So Jody and I looked into alternatives, and we came up with this bin washer. It looks, it's quite a piece of equipment that we got made by Salazar. And now it's one of the jobs that we always have 2 volunteers who are very happy to wash bins for an afternoon. Plus, it has sped up the process, of course, quite a bit. Instead of spending 2 full afternoons with a couple of people power washing, it's a couple of hours a week now to wash 1,000 bins. The other job that people didn't like was picking up remay and rolling up in a big ball. Everybody has the experience. You roll it up in one big burrito, and then you unroll it again, and it's all twirled up. So we invested in a machine to collect and to lay out the remay. It's called a hiver remay or floating row cover machine. And storage of the row cover is also much better, and the covers actually last longer. Here, the payback of this machine is partly in reducing drudgery, but also because the row covers themselves last so much longer. So I really want to mention all these things about quality of life because finances are really not the only thing we base our equipment purchases on. And so here's another example where the crew said to us, like, we're no longer going to use square bales of straw to lay in between the black plastic. So we have a system here to control weeds in between black plastic with straw. And yes, the straw became rather expensive. It's nice when we had our own round bale. We could make our own round bale of straw. And it was also a tremendous opportunity for us then to mechanize that part of the farm. Right now, it is still drudgery for one person in the sense of driving tractor and laying down straw, but it is not that the whole crew is involved anymore. People were complaining about hay fever and things like that from the straw that we bought in. The other thing that the crew doesn't appreciate very much is crawling on their hands and knees. We still do that a lot when we say harvest salad mix and arugula and those crops. But at in the fall when we are, and that's only for maybe a couple hours a day, but when you come to the fall harvest, when you do potatoes and sweet potatoes, people are on their knees almost all day. And that was really too much for us. So I went to Holland, where I am originally from, and I looked for some used harvesters, and I picked one up. And this is another way in which you have to be somewhat creative. You know, I worked together with a number of other growers, and we were able to fill up a couple of containers of equipment bringing in from Europe, where I found that used equipment was far less expensive than what I could purchase it for in the U.S. Now, the diversification of our farm is also making the farms more resilient. It definitely does put a burden in the sense that we needed to mechanize more. I mean, the animal enterprise is heavily mechanized, but by bringing in our own animals, we have 50 head of cattle, and then we have 50 sheep. We can also work towards producing our own fertility needs on the farm. So the cow manure was composted and brought back to the vegetable fields. So the cows generate way more than meat, but also provide for some of the fertility of the cash crops. And the other part of it is that having animals on the farm allowed us to provide some employment for our year-round crew. Now, the other part that is really important is to address safety. We like to have our equipment in good shape, have the PTO shields in place whenever we can do. Working with equipment is really, really dangerous. So one of the things is that, you know, equipment does decrease the safety on the farm, or can decrease the safety on the farm. A good example of that for me was hooking up equipment. I was helping someone hooking up a piece of 3-point hitch equipment, and that person accidentally left his foot, slipped his foot off the clutch, and I had enough presence of mind to jump out of the way and to step out of it, but I could have been crushed. So that was the moment that we said, like, we need a way to hook up equipment easier. And the way we solved that problem is buying Jiffy quick hitches. On the left side, you can see is the male A-frame, and the male A-frame drives into the female A-frame on the equipment. It's the hookup and unhooking is a matter of 1 or 2 minutes now. It's very quick, and there was no second person involved in that. So initially we bought this for safety, but then once we had it, we realized, wow, what a convenience this is. And it also makes it that if I have a 5-minute job at the end of the day with one piece of equipment, I would not do that because it would take me, 20 minutes to hook it up and the aggravation of it all. But now it is like I take one piece of equipment up and put the other one on in a matter of minutes. And it allows me to switch over much quicker. So the thing is that you always have to ask yourself that in the end, when you look at all these pictures of equipment, is that you do need to think about this too, is that when you design your farm, is that, and it's a quality of life question, when you bring all the equipment onto the farm, it really does affect, how the farm feels and how you experience the farm. We are pretty well mechanized, and at some point, my wife said, like, there's some point where, I feel like a truck driver, and we actually got a workhorse to sometimes feel the reins and feel again to work with your hands, because sometimes you lose that. And for some people, that's the scale even as far as they want to go, and it's a way more pleasant scale to work at. When we work with the draft horse, it's unbelievable the feeling that you have, but working the land is quite differently, because tractors are quite noisy. They smell. Every time you touch them, you get your hands full of grease, and with a horse it's quite different. That doesn't mean that you don't use equipment. Actually, this is a quite nice piece of equipment that we brought in from Belgium. It's called a Malot. It's a horse cultivator that was built in the 50s. And it's really about, do you enjoy fixing it? Here is a potato digger on the left that just seemed like it broke down more than we actually got it working in the field. And some people are so intimidated with equipment, they are finding ways to mechanize in a very simple manner and very creatively. By example, here I've seen a nice example here with this bicycle situation, whereby they can increase their efficiency with very low tech, very low cost. And the nice thing is that those things there's less moving parts, doesn't break down as fast. When you think about finding equipment, there's a couple of considerations here. I have learned the hard way to mostly select, for example, tractor brands on who are my local dealers, who am I going to deal with locally, because I need to be able to call them when something breaks. And the same thing for any other piece of equipment. We do bring in equipment from Europe, but we tend to make sure that we can get the parts. And I never go to auctions anymore. This is the one on the right here is one of my last auction ordeal back in 2001. We needed to go to a field that was 3,000 feet away from the creek. And I looked at the cost of bringing water to that field, and I was able to get a truckload of pipe for $5 a length. And I didn't really think about it, how old that pipe was, because when we wanted to replace the gaskets on these pipes, I just couldn't locate the gaskets. So we were able to irrigate that field, although the pipe was leaking quite badly, and then we decided, after all, to put in an underground irrigation line, which was much more efficient. And, the pipe was just sitting around. At least this story had a happy ending. When the aluminum price went up, we were able to sell it for $20 a length. I actually made $15 a length on it in the course of about 6 years. But most of the time, when you pick something up at an auction, that can turn into a horror story as well. You really have to do your research before you buy. Now, the third segment here I just want to go to some equipment that we use. I already showed you quite a few pictures of the things that we use, and we'll probably see some of them again, and we'll be able to tell a little bit more about them. So what I want to do is to look at field prep and soil fertility parts, greenhouse production, seeding and transplanting, weed control, harvesting, and post-harvest. So one of the things that I found that works really well, we use, in addition to our composted cow manure, we use a composted poultry manure. And the way that we spread that is with this Kuhn fertilizer spreader. And the real dilemma was, how can we get an even coverage? This is a very nice machine because it has a spread limiter on it. As you can see, it has 2 spinners. And what it allows us to do, to go on the outside of a section and to spread in one direction. And by driving on the outside of the section, we get a much better coverage than driving in the middle of the section, whereby, of course, the outer edges of the spread width of the fertilizer spreader, there will be an uneven thickness. So it was a specific problem related, of course, to the fact that we are working in sections and where we're trying to not fertilize the harvest lanes. And that worked out pretty good with this particular spreader. We also use it to seed our cover crops with, and it gives an unbelievably even stand in cover crops. Now, we don't use a plow and a moldboard plow anymore, but we will use it if we want to plow up a hayfield. That's the only time when we actually use a rollover plow, is when we want to renovate a hayfield. The primary and secondary tillage we do on our farm is done with a brilliant coulter chisel plow. And if you look at behind the coulter chisel plow, we have an attachment. It's made by OEFFA. And the first bar, we have a set of S-tines that do the first set of leveling of the ridges that are left by the chisels of the chisel plow. And then the S-tines are followed then again with a leveling bar. And what it does, it allows us to do primary and secondary tillage in one pass. And you can see that we are, this is working under sorghum Sudan grass. We're working under quite a bit of material there. What we do here is then we take a disc bedder. This particular one is made by Ferguson, but there are many manufacturers out there that make a disc bedder. Most of them are set up with 36 inches for a ridge system, but it works just as well if you set them at 72 inches or at 60 inches apart. But the nice thing about this disc bedder is that it brings up bare ground from deeper down and then buries the cover crop remnants. So it can break down deeper down. So the chisel plow does not incorporate it very well, but the disc will then hill up enough soil so for the cover crop to break down. So when we are, say, chopping up a full crop of, say, oats, bell beans, and peas, or a full crop of sorghum Sudan, there's about a 2-week delay between primary tillage and the planting of the actual vegetables. Why we decided to go for a multi-disc bedder is because with a single bedder, what we found, it was very difficult to lay exactly 8 beds in one section. And because what happens is that you tend to, if you make one bed at a time, you tend, with your tractor tire, fall in the furrow, and then you are compensating. So you're trying to either steer away from the raised bed and then you overcompensate possibly, or you don't compensate enough and then you get too close by. So you can see the dilemma if you are done with laying out the 8 beds, if you have a strip of land left over, or you end up with your bed shaper into the harvest lane. After we make the beds with the double disc bedder and we let the Perfecta bedder. Perfecta makes harrows, but they also make bedders. They may actually make multi-bedders as well. This is a single one. And we ended up putting an additional crumbler roller in the front there that did not come standard with this particular machine. And then we added, instead of having the shovels that this machine comes with, we replaced that with some Lilliston disc hillers. The final pass is made with a combination seedbed maker. And the real difference between this machine and the previous one is that we can very accurately control the depth of our seed bed. And that is very important in the sense that we want to place the seed in firm ground. So if we are planting carrots, we want to create a seed bed with loose soil, not deeper than maybe ½ an inch. If we want to transplant cabbage or something, we will go 2 or 3 inches deep with this tool. And the way that is being done is there is a, you can see how the whole frame can be brought up or down, and therefore moving the S-tines further down or further up. The same thing with the leveling bars in the front and the rear. They can all be adjusted up and down. And then it will make the final seed bed, but then also it will do some stale seed bedding right before we plant our crops. And again, when it comes to weed control, you don't want to go deep. You want to stay relatively shallow, because every time when you work the soil deep is you bring up new weed seeds. We do have a system aside from the raised beds that is actually 2 raised beds made with a ridger. Here is a 2-row ridger made by Steketee in Holland that we use. We plant carrots, parsnips, sweet potatoes, and potatoes on ridges. And then, of course, the question is always how you control weeds. We'll look at some pictures later on this other tool that is a hoeing machine specifically designed to control weeds on ridges. But what we have found is that this particular ridger has actually doubled the yield for us on carrots. Even though instead of growing 3 rows 18 inches apart on a raised bed, we're growing 2 rows 36 inches apart, and we still double the yield. Greenhouse production. We're very tired of throwing away these pluck trays, so we invested in windstrip trays. They come in all different sizes. The sizes that we chose were 288s, 128, and 50s. And we were able to pick up an old flat filler. This is one of the things you pick up on a Craigslist or something like that. You know, some greenhouse goes out of business, and he doesn't really know what to do with it. And you can pick them up for relatively little money. It's one of these tools where it doesn't matter if you buy an old machine. You find the winter to replace some of the bearings, or if the motor goes bad, you know, there's no stress on the farm because you can always go back to filling these flats by hand again. But the quality really of filling flats with a machine like that is so much higher than filling them by hand that we really enjoy this machine. And again, people didn't like filling flats by hand. It was one of these things where if a person, all they do is fill flats one day, their job becomes drudgery again. This is an easy seeder. There's many of those seeders out there. This is just the one we use. I don't really say that this one is the best one. it happens to be the one that we ended up buying. And the principle is the same for all of these vacuum seeders. They have a number of holes in them. In this case, 128. Or actually, in this case, that where he's turning it over is a 50. That looks like melon seed. So he must be seeding melon. On the left side is 128, and the right side is 50. And then it sucks one seed, and then you have to still singulate them. And then you turn it over, turn the vacuum off, and then it will save a lot of the hand seeding. Something like this has a very easy payback period. But the one that is really a great payback period is the plug popper. Before the plants go out in the field, we pop the plugs before they go out, and then it facilitates greatly for people to get these plants out of the plugs and then to put them into the planter. So we already saw pictures of the water wheel planter before, not much to say about that. Just a little bit more about the carousel planter. I mentioned already the ergonomic design of it. There's a number of them made. This is made in Finland. It was actually originally designed for planting trees. Mechanical transplanter makes a carousel planter. It just increases the efficiency dramatically, especially if it is in conjunction with a plug popper, when you can actually pop the plants out of the cell so people can grab 4 plants at a time, put 4 plants in the carousel, grab 4 plants again. And that really allows us to, where we originally needed a creeper gear on our tractor, we no longer need a creeper gear. This is basically a bare root plant that we still use. This is a French machine. We just appreciated this machine because of the way that people can lock their plants in themselves instead of waiting for the plant to close in on the plant. It facilitated a little bit better. We use bare roots for leeks and for sweet potatoes. We have a number of vacuum seeder. We like the Matermac for the larger seed. On the picture on the left, we actually are seeding bell beans directly to oats, which is so it does do a little bit of no-till as well. And then on the bottom, you can see where we're seeding beans, snap beans, and whereby we are making a seed bed and seeding in one pass. This is for small seeds. We decided on a stockia over a Matermac. Really no particular reason. It just happened to come our way. It was easier to purchase. It is one of these machines whereby we get a tremendous amount of control over the plant density. We don't like thinning. And we want to have a good stand. And what a vacuum planter is, it's also a precision planter in the sense that it actually places the seed not only precise, but it also places in a very firm seed bed. We never irrigate our seeds in. The whole point is if you create a good seed bed and the seed sits in firm soil, then the moisture of the soil deeper down will bring the moisture to the seed. At the moment you start irrigating in order to have your seed come up, you already lost half the battle with your weed control. So this is one of those things, but then you got to have not a drill, but you got to have a planter, something that actually lays the seed on firm ground. And this is something that these all of these precision planters will do, if it's a stand hay or anything like that, but a drill just won't. That segues pretty good into weed control. Again, I've already mentioned to you my passion for welding. A couple of growers, we were tired of basket weeders bending up every year. They're really designed for muck soil, not for mineral soil. So we decided to design a basket weeder for mineral soil. We got a local welder to build us some cages at the size that we want them to be, because Remlinger only made one particular basket that didn't fit our row system. This is a 5-row basket weeder. And then we bought the parts to suspend the basket from the frame from Remlinger. And then we used some 3-point hits that we bought through Rollicone. And actually the gauge wheels came from OEFFA. So, you know, sometimes it's the welding is the easy part, but then the parts is just still you have to buy them. For precision row control, we found, as you can see, we didn't show you any cultivating track because we no longer have any cultivating tractors. We only have front mount cultivation or rear mount cultivation. And this is the rear mount cultivation we do. This is one of the rear mount cultivations we do. We can steer here. And with the basket weeder, we generally can go as close as maybe 2 inches away from the crop. That means there's 4 inches between the baskets. With this machine, we can go 1 inch away from the crop. So greatly reducing the need for hand labor. But, you know, the person who is steering has to pay really close attention. We use a finger weeder for our 3-row crop or our transplanted crops. Again, it is front mounted again. I know that it's possible to mount a finger weeder on a belly mounted tractor if you are willing to split the tractor apart and actually extend it. There's just simply not enough space otherwise to mount these finger weeders underneath unless you want to use the finger weeder from budding. This finger weeder made in Holland and in Germany. Kress builds them, Stekete builds them. They are very rugged. We've had them now for 4 years and we had not to replace any of the fingers, neither do they show much wear at all. and they do a marvelous job of in-row weeding. And then we use an I&J S-tine, parallel suspended S-tine for the wheel tracks, and that's mounted in the back. I mentioned already before, when you are going to cultivate ridges, you will see that you need some very specialty equipment to cultivate those ridges with. The ridge culture is widely adopted in Europe because it increases the yield so dramatically. And we actually see the ridge culture is widely adapted also in California. They use that quite a bit over there. You don't see it much on the East Coast, but my prediction is that when people see the numbers, we will make that transition here as well, because you have so much more topsoil to work with. This is a specialty tool in the sense that it will, with the front disc, it will take soil away from the ridge, and then with the rear disc, put the soil back again, and then to avoid burying your carrots and your parsnips, it has those root shields, those plant shields to prevent the dirt from covering it. The other rear-mounted cultivator we use is a hillside cultivator with hydraulic steering. It's hard to see in the picture here, but it's actually a person sitting on the back, and it's hydraulically steered to the left and the right, which gives us much more independence from the person driving. If the person in the front just makes a slight mistake, the person in the back can correct for that, and we can go a lot closer to the plastic to eliminate all the weeds. We always cultivate weeds before we then eventually lay the straw down. Harvesting. We use plastic containers. It looks like we have a love affair with plastic, but really the food safety really forces us to use any kind of bin that can be washable, and we like to reuse them. The cost of a plastic container over time is less than 3 cents every time you use it. We started buying crates in 1995 that are still highly usable to this day. And when you figure out how many times we've used them, it comes out to be pennies every time you use them, compared to a wax box that costs you $1.50 or more. We love the micro bins because it allows us not having to carry our crops and to be able to handle a lot of these crops with bin dumpers and things like that. This is a conveyor. We call it conveyor. I don't think it's called conveyor, but it really has reduced people having to drag the pickle barrels through the fields. It's a very simple tool. It's actually made for the base of it is a ladder. It's an aluminum ladder that they build a conveyor belt around, made by Mennonites. The thing what I mentioned before, where you try to take the peak away of your labor, we found that both garlic and onions are two crops that are just impossible to bring in bulk because we're so busy at those months. So we had to find ways to reduce our hand labor, both in the garlic and in the onions. But the garlic, of course, we have the members. But then still, we want to be able to get all the garlic out in one morning. The one thing about it is when you work with members, they are there for 3 hours. In those 3 hours, you want to harvest an acre of garlic. And we have 70 people who come out. But if we can also then already top the garlic, since we top our garlic before we bring it in, which actually helps with the drying process, we actually get it all in. The same with the onions, by being able to top the onions. And so when we pull the onions, we don't cut them. We can top them. It has greatly reduced the stress in that first week in August. Harvesting, bunching carrots, harvesting leeks, harvesting garlic also is greatly facilitated with this PTO-powered bed lifter. Post-harvest, just a few tools here. This is equipment from ACS. It's a brusher washer, and it has really helped us to be able to sort our product a little bit better. And and we move it inside over the winter months, and we wash all winter long. It's nice to have winter work and to be able to have storage facility and to continue to be able to wash your produce. This is a barrel washer, and the last picture here is then it's called a torrent. It's a bunch washer that we picked up at Rotor's Equipment. They put new brushes in there, and it made the washing of bunches a lot nicer. Doesn't work as well for bunches and turnips, but it works pretty nice. Thank you very much, and I think that we can go over to the questions section, Eric.
Excellent. Thanks, John Paul. So how long did it take Roxbury Farm to implement these systems?
Well, the systems actually were there very early, but if you're talking about scaling up, that took a long time. So you have to understand, I started my farm with virtually nothing. I had no savings, and so and also I have a very conservative philosophy about financing. I come from a very poor background. We lived on welfare, so debt was something that was a bad word in our household, and I carry that still very deeply. I hate carrying debt, so we really needed to, when we wanted to reinvest, we had to do it out of the profits from the farm, which we did. And so we had to also make very smart moves. You know, we had to initially invest only in these pieces of equipment that had a very quick payback period. And then over time, you start investing in your crew. You really need to be able to make sure that you retain your crew, and then you start investing in your labor. So the emphasis changed over time. But to answer your question about systems, very early on, we changed to a system of having harvest lanes and having a raised bed system as a way in which I could, and also the system of having 50% of our land out of production. That part of the systems was very early on established, and I pretty much based most of my information, of course, on my experience working in Holland on vegetable farms there. So I knew where I wanted to go. It doesn't mean that I always was there at any given time, but I implemented everything based on the picture I had. When we would finally get there, then it would be easier to make that change. So having the end in sight is really important whenever you go to these stages of growth. And therefore, when you scale up, it makes it so much easier, and you don't have to say 10 years. You know, when you want to grow, get rid of all your equipment and start all over again.
Yeah, this is a webinar on equipment, but you talked a little bit about fertility. You know, so soil balancing. Do you see any of those soil improvements diminishing the weed pressure?
Oh, we had tremendous weed pressure when we first took this farm over. We had tremendous disease pressure when we took this farm over. I mean, I came from a situation, so just a little bit the story of Roxbury Farm. We were for 10 years on different land. It was on leased land. And it was a previous dairy farm, and we were basically in heaven. We had soil organic matter of 3.5% because the farm had always been spreading manure there. And then we lost the lease on that land, and we looked for a new piece of property. And of course, I wanted to get the best land as far as physical quality is concerned. You know, looking at soil type. And that land was a potato farm. But what we realized that the soil organic matter was like 1.4%. And when we found the hills, they were covered in purslane. You couldn't even see the soil anymore. The very early years, we dealt with tremendous weed pressure, and really through building up the organic matter and creating a bare fallow, we have really brought that weed pressure down. but initially that was very difficult. There were other pieces that we took back from continuous corn. They were invested with bindweed, with crackgrass, with foxtail, and so it was a very slow conversion over time to bring that land back to whereby we were able to crop it without using tremendous resources to clean it up.
It seems from some of the pictures that you've got a fair amount of topography changes in your production areas. Here in Ohio, there are areas of unglaciated areas that, sometimes people put calcium chloride in their tractor tires to help with stability on hillsides. Do you see any negatives to that with compaction?
No. So I didn't actually go into that, but we have two different kinds of tractors on our farm. We have our utility tractors that are filled with calcium chloride, and because we want the weight. When I'm pulling that Coulter chisel plow, I need to have that tractor weigh about 12,000 pounds. I'm looking at the slippage there. So if I want to be able to pull that chisel plow at a certain depth, I don't just need horsepower, I also need weight, because then I need grip. And so since that I use that very heavy tractor in my primary and secondary tillage, I'm not really worried about compaction that the tractor is causing. Now the other tractors we use after that, they are not weighted down. They are not small tractors, but they have a very narrow footprint. They're called high clearance tractors. But we only drive them in the wheel tracks. And so the only compaction that these tractors cause are really in an area where we're not planting crops. We're planting crops on the raised beds, or we're planting crops on top of the ridges. And there is never any compaction there. So you really need to look at that you have two different animals really of tractors. One to pull your heavy tillage equipment with, and other tractors where you are doing your cultivation with.
Thank you. I have a couple questions about pesticides use. You mentioned chemicals during your presentation, but just to clarify, you are certified organic.
Yes.
You can only use approved organic inputs. There are organically approved pesticides, but they have to be naturally derived.
Absolutely.
So obviously in the organic standards, weed control is primarily through tillage. Is there any other options besides cultivating?
No. I mean, that's the whole thing, is that when we talk about reduced tillage in vegetable crop production for organic farmers, it is really difficult. And that's why I like the plastic culture with straw, because, it is really one way in which we can prevent erosion when we have heavy downpours. When you are having open ground, especially with the ridge culture, and you get a heavy downpour, there can be, even on a very slight slope of 2%. And by the way, let me clarify why I use the word chemicals, because in a way it is not chemicals that we use, of course, but we actually here on the farm calling them, because the new OMRI listed materials, they come in these slick plastic bottles, and we have actually started calling them that way because they don't look very biological anymore. So we are very much a biological farm, and here we are getting, for example, when we control potato leafhopper, when we use Pyganic, I call Pyganic a chemical, even though it's an OMRI listed material, because I actually hate using it. It feels like something chemical to me when I actually put it in the spray tank. So even though we can all feel good about the fact it's OMRI listed, there's something about it that seems to take us away from what we originally were about. So let me clarify that.
Yeah, thank you. Just because it's approved, like for Pyganic,
Yeah, yeah.
there's a 24-hour restriction on that, so that's saying something to me.
I know, and it does smell really, really bad. It gives me a headache. So we at the farm call it chemical still. But you got to be careful when you say that.
We look at the organic standards. It has to be cultural, physical, mechanical, and then you can get to a chemical control.
Yeah, we never use any chemical control on our farm.
Well, that was the last question. I want to thank you for taking the time to present this quality information. I know that I've learned quite a bit.
All right, that's great.
And just a shameless plug, next Thursday we have another specialty crop webinar on pest controls and fertility inputs. This webinar has been recorded and will be archived on the OEFFA website. Here, give us a couple days. All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.